I was standing in my warehouse office, reviewing inventory spreadsheets, when the certified letter arrived that would change everything about my relationship with the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association forever. The letter was from a woman named Patricia Henderson, president of the HOA board, and it contained the most absurd demand I had seen in my 15 years of running businesses. According to her interpretation of some obscure covenant buried in page 47 of the community bylaws, my commercial warehouse violated dimensional restrictions because it exceeded 12,000 square feet. The structure I had legally built on my property 3 years ago measured exactly 14,200 square feet, and now they wanted me to either demolish 2,000 square feet of it or face daily fines starting at $500. My name is Jason Mitchell, and I have never been the type of man to back down from bullies, especially ones hiding behind bureaucratic nonsense. I built my logistics company from nothing, starting with a single delivery van and growing it into a regional operation with 47 employees and annual revenue approaching $8 million. The warehouse sat on my residential property in Riverside Meadows, a planned community outside Phoenix, Arizona, where large lots and mixed-use zoning had attracted entrepreneurs like myself who wanted to live and work on the same property. I read through the letter 3 more times, my blood pressure rising with each pass. The covenant they cited was never mentioned during my purchase, never flagged during construction permitting, and never enforced against any other property owner in the community. This was targeted harassment, plain and simple. My wife Sarah was in the kitchen when I stormed into the house, waving the letter like a battle flag. She looked up from her laptop where she was managing her interior design business and immediately recognized my expression. "What happened?" she asked, closing the computer. "The HOA has lost their minds," I said, dropping the letter on the counter. "Patricia Henderson thinks she can force me to tear down part of my warehouse. 2,000 square feet, Sarah. You know what that would cost, what it would do to my operations." She picked up the letter and read through it carefully, her expression shifting from confusion to anger. Sarah had always been the calmer one between us, the person who could see all sides of an argument, but even she could not find any rationality in this demand. "This is insane," she said finally. "Can they actually do this?" "Not if I have anything to say about it," I replied. "I am calling my attorney right now." David Chen had been my business attorney for 8 years, handling everything from contract negotiations to employment disputes. When I explained the situation over the phone, he was silent for a long moment. "Jason, I need you to send me everything," he said. "The original HOA documents from your purchase, all permits for the warehouse construction, and this letter. I will review the covenant they are citing and get back to you within 48 hours. Those 48 hours felt like 48 days. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept circling back to the absurdity of the situation. My warehouse was not an eyesore. It was a professional metal building with attractive landscaping, proper setbacks from all property lines, and full compliance with county codes. Several neighbors had even complimented the design. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this was personal. Patricia Henderson had opposed my warehouse from the beginning, showing up at county planning meetings to voice her objections. She had lost those battles because my plans met every legal requirement. Now she was trying to use HOA authority to accomplish what she could not achieve through proper channels. David called me back on a Thursday afternoon with news that confirmed my suspicions. "Jason, this is a reach," he said. "The covenant they are citing applies to accessory structures like sheds and detached garages. Your warehouse is clearly a primary commercial building on a property zoned for mixed use. I found documentation showing the HOA approved similar structures on 3 other properties in your community. This is selective enforcement, which gives us grounds to fight back. What are my options? I asked. We can request a hearing before the HOA board, challenge the interpretation of the covenant, and if necessary, file for injunctive relief in court. But I need to be honest with you, HOA litigation can drag on for years and cost tens of thousands of dollars. These organizations have deep pockets funded by dues from hundreds of homeowners. I leaned back in my office chair, staring at the ceiling. Years of litigation. Tens of thousands in legal fees. All because one vindictive board president wanted to flex her authority. Set up the hearing, I said. I want to face them directly first. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday evening at the community center, a bland single-story building near the entrance of Riverside Meadows. I arrived 15 minutes early with David, carrying a binder full of documentation supporting my position. The community center's main room had been arranged with a long table at the front where 5 board members sat, and rows of folding chairs facing them, where about 30 residents had gathered to watch the proceedings. Patricia Henderson sat in the center of the board table, a woman in her mid-50s with short blonde hair styled in that aggressive soccer mom cut that seemed mandatory for HOA presidents. She wore a navy blazer and had a stack of papers arranged precisely in front of her. To her left sat Gregory Walsh, the vice president, a retired accountant who seemed perpetually uncomfortable. The other 3 board members were Denise Morrison, Frank Palmer, and Linda Sawyer, all neighborhood busybodies who had found purpose in governing the minutiae of other people's properties. This hearing will come to order, Patricia announced, banging a gavel that seemed absurdly theatrical. We are here to address the matter of 4782 Desert Vista Drive and the structure in violation of community covenants. I stood when she gestured for me to approach. David remained seated, ready to intervene if necessary. Mr. Mitchell, you received our notice regarding the dimensional violation of your warehouse structure, Patricia continued. The board has determined this building exceeds the 12,000 square foot limitation established in Section 9, Paragraph 4 of the Community Covenants. You have 30 days to bring the property into compliance or face daily fines. With all due respect, Mrs. Henderson, that interpretation is incorrect, I said, keeping my voice level. Section 9, Paragraph 4 specifically addresses accessory structures. My warehouse is a primary commercial building on property zoned for mixed use. The county approved every aspect of this construction. County zoning and HOA covenants are separate matters, Patricia replied with a tight smile. Our restrictions exist regardless of what the county permits. Then why were 3 other commercial structures approved without any mention of this restriction? I asked. I have documentation showing the HOA explicitly approved buildings larger than mine on properties within this community. Patricia's smile vanished. Those situations are not comparable. They are exactly comparable, I countered. This is selective enforcement, which is prohibited under Arizona HOA law. You cannot apply covenants inconsistently based on personal preferences. The room had gone very quiet. Several residents were leaning forward, clearly interested in this confrontation. Patricia's face was turning an interesting shade of red. Mr. Mitchell, I will remind you that this board has the authority to interpret and enforce our covenants as we see fit, she said, her voice rising. Your attitude is not helping your case. My attitude. I felt my own anger breaking through. You sent me a letter demanding I demolish part of a legally constructed building based on a fabricated violation. You are abusing your authority because you personally dislike having a warehouse in your view, even though my property is over half a mile from yours. That is enough. Patricia slammed her hand on the table. This hearing is concluded. The board's decision stands. You have 30 days to comply. Then I will see you in court, I said. David and I walked out of the community center into the warm Arizona evening. Several residents followed us out, and one man I recognized as Tom Rodriguez approached. That was something else, Tom said, shaking his head. Patricia has been on a power trip since she got elected, but this is extreme. Half the neighborhood thinks she is crazy. Only half? I asked with a grim smile. The other half are too scared to say anything, Tom replied. She has been targeting people for years over petty violations. My neighbor got fined because his mailbox was the wrong shade of beige. Another guy got hit with violations because his Christmas lights stayed up until January 3rd. This confirmed what I had suspected. Patricia Henderson was not just targeting me, she was terrorizing the entire community. An idea began forming in my mind, one that would require research and resources, but could solve the problem permanently. Over the next week, I did something Patricia probably never expected. Instead of hiring a litigator to fight the HOA in court, I started investigating the HOA itself. I wanted to understand how the organization functioned, who controlled it, and where the vulnerabilities were. What I discovered was fascinating. Riverside Meadows HOA was managed by a company called Premier Community Management, a mid-sized firm that handled about 40 HOAs across the Phoenix metro area. Premier provided the administrative support, financial management, and legal guidance that allowed HOA boards to function. The boards themselves were elected by homeowners, but relied entirely on the management company for day-to-day operations. I spent hours researching Premier Community Management, pulling public records, financial filings, and corporate registration documents. The company was privately held, owned by a man named Robert Carlson who had started it 23 years ago. Revenue was estimated at around $12 million annually, with profit margins in the neighborhood of 20%. It was a solid business but not particularly sophisticated. Then I found something interesting. Robert Carlson was 68 years old and had been trying to sell the company for the past 2 years. There had been negotiations with several potential buyers, but none had resulted in a sale. The most recent asking price, according to a business broker's listing I found, was $8 million. I sat back in my chair, thinking through the possibilities. $8 million was a substantial amount of money, but it was not impossible. My logistics company was worth approximately $6 million based on recent valuations. I owned the warehouse and property free and clear, worth another $2 million. I had personal savings and investments totaling about $1.5 million. If I was willing to leverage everything, if I was willing to take a massive financial risk, I could potentially acquire Premier Community Management. And if I owned the management company, I would control the HOA that was threatening me. It was an insane idea. It was also exactly the kind of bold move that had built my business in the first place. I had always believed in aggressive problem solving, in turning threats into opportunities. This situation was begging for that approach. I discussed the idea with Sarah that evening over dinner. I laid out the entire plan, the financial implications and the risks involved. She listened without interrupting, her expression moving through surprise, concern, and finally something that looked like excited admiration. "You are actually serious about this," she said when I finished. "Completely serious," I replied. Patricia Henderson wants to play power games. I will show her what real power looks like. It is risky, Jason. You would be putting everything on the line. I know, but think about what we gain if it works. We eliminate the HOA threat permanently. We acquire a profitable business that generates steady income, and we help hundreds of homeowners who are being harassed by petty tyrants like Patricia. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then reached across the table to take my hand. If you are going to do this, do it right. No half measures. I spent the next 2 weeks moving at a pace that would have seemed reckless if I had stopped to think about it. I contacted Robert Carlson directly, introduced myself as a business owner interested in acquiring premier community management, and requested a meeting. He was understandably surprised, but agreed to sit down. We met at a steakhouse in Scottsdale, a dimly lit establishment where deals like this were probably negotiated regularly. Robert was a tall man with silver hair and the weathered look of someone who had spent decades managing difficult people. He ordered scotch before we even looked at the menus. "So you want to buy my company?" Robert said after we had exchanged pleasantries. "Mind if I ask why? You run a logistics business, not a management firm." "I have a problem with an HOA that your company manages," I said, deciding honesty was the best approach. Rather than fight them in court for years, I thought I would acquire the company and solve the problem directly. Robert actually laughed at that, a genuine bark of amusement. "That is the most ridiculous reason to buy a business I have ever heard. I love it." "Which HOA?" "Riverside Meadows." His expression changed immediately. "Let me guess. Patricia Henderson is making your life hell. You know her, know her. She calls my office about 15 times a week. The woman is absolutely insane, but she keeps getting re-elected because nobody wants to run against her. My property managers hate dealing with her. She treats them like personal assistants and throws tantrums when she does not get her way immediately." This was better than I had hoped. "So you would not be sad to see new management take over that relationship?" "I would throw a party," Robert said. "But let us talk seriously for a minute. You are looking at an $8 million acquisition for a business you know nothing about, all to solve a personal problem. That is not smart business. What if I am also looking at a profitable business with stable revenue and growth potential?" I countered. "What if I see an opportunity to modernize operations, improve service delivery, and expand market share? The personal problem is the catalyst, but the business case is solid." Robert studied me for a long moment. "You have done your homework." "I always do." We spent the next 3 hours discussing every aspect of premier community management. Robert walked me through the client list, revenue breakdown, staffing structure, and operational challenges. The company employed 23 people, managed 41 HOAs, and had long-term contracts that provided stability. The main challenge was finding and retaining good property managers who could handle difficult board members. By the end of the evening, we had the outline of a deal. $8 million, with $4 million paid at closing and $4 million in seller financing over 5 years. Robert would stay on for 90 days to facilitate the transition, then retire to his place in Sedona. I would assume full control and operate the business as I saw fit. The next step was financing, which meant leveraging everything I owned. I met with my banker, a woman named Rebecca Torres who had supported my logistics company's growth for years. When I explained what I wanted to do, she looked at me like I had lost my mind. "Jason, this is extremely aggressive," Rebecca said, pulling up financial projections on her computer. "You are talking about pledging your business, your property, and your personal assets as collateral. If this acquisition does not work out, you could lose everything." "I understand the risk," I said, "but I also understand the opportunity." Premier Community Management has 23 years of operating history and stable cash flow. This is not a speculative venture. Rebecca spent a week reviewing the deal from every angle. She brought in credit analysts, had appraisers value my assets, and scrutinized Premier's financial statements. Finally, she called me back into her office with news. "We will do it," she said. "But you need to maintain certain debt-to-income ratios, and we will be monitoring both businesses closely. Any significant disruption to revenue, and we will need to have serious conversations." Understood. The loan paperwork took another 2 weeks to finalize. I signed document after document, each one representing another piece of my financial life being pledged as collateral. Sarah signed alongside me on several forms, equally committed to this audacious plan. By the time we finished, I felt like I had signed my name 1,000 times. The closing was scheduled for a Friday afternoon at a title company in downtown Phoenix. Robert Carlson arrived with his attorney, and I came with David Chen and an entire team of advisors. We spent 4 hours reviewing documents, transferring assets, and executing agreements. When it was finally done, I owned Premier Community Management and controlled the fate of 41 HOAs, including Riverside Meadows. Robert shook my hand as we walked out. "You are either brilliant or crazy," he said. "I am genuinely curious to see which one it is. Good luck, Jason." I took the weekend to review every aspect of my new acquisition, focusing particularly on Riverside Meadows. The HOA's files revealed exactly what I suspected. Patricia Henderson was a nightmare client who made constant demands, ignored professional advice, and drove board decisions based on personal vendettas. My warehouse situation was just the latest example of her abuse of power. The files also revealed something more interesting. Patricia and the board had been implementing policies that likely violated Arizona HOA law. They had been selective in enforcement, denied due process to homeowners, and made several decisions without proper voting procedures. The management company's property managers had tried to warn them multiple times, but Patricia had dismissed these concerns. I spent Sunday evening crafting a plan. Monday morning, I called a mandatory meeting of all Premier Community Management staff. They gathered in the conference room at 9 sharp, 23 employees ranging from property managers to administrative assistants. They looked nervous, which was understandable given the sudden ownership change. "Good morning, everyone," I said, standing at the head of the conference room. "I am Jason Mitchell, and as of Friday, I own this company. I want to be very clear about my intentions. I did not buy Premier Community Management to strip it down or make radical changes. I bought it because I see a good business with dedicated employees who are being undermined by difficult clients." I saw some of the tension leave the room. Over the next 90 days, we are going to evaluate every client relationship and every operational procedure. I want to hear your honest feedback about what works, what does not, and what needs to change. No retaliation, no politics, just straight talk. Who wants to go first? A property manager named Jennifer raised her hand. She was in her early 30s with tired eyes that suggested she had been dealing with too much nonsense for too long. "The biggest problem we have is board members who treat us like servants instead of professional managers," Jennifer said. "They call at all hours, demand we handle personal errands, and ignore our advice even when we are trying to protect them from legal liability. It is exhausting." "Give me an example," I said. "Patricia Henderson at Riverside Meadows," Jennifer replied, and several other employees groaned in recognition. "She called me at 11 p.m. last week because she saw a neighbor's garbage can visible from the street. She wanted me to drive over there immediately and issue a violation notice. When I explained that was not how violations work, she threatened to have me fired. "That ends today," I said. "Patricia Henderson does not have the authority to fire anyone. I do. And I am telling you right now that you have my full support to manage these communities professionally. If a board member is abusive or makes unreasonable demands, document it and bring it to me. We are going to set boundaries." The mood in the room shifted dramatically. For the first time, these employees looked hopeful. Over the next week, I immersed myself in the HOA management business. I met with every property manager individually, reviewed every client file, and started identifying problems that needed immediate attention. Riverside Meadows was near the top of that list. I scheduled a meeting with Patricia Henderson, not as a homeowner, but as the new owner of Premier Community Management. I sent her a formal letter requesting her presence at the Premier office on a Tuesday afternoon. She arrived exactly on time, dressed in another aggressive blazer, and carrying a leather portfolio that probably contained a list of demands. Patricia walked into my office like she owned the place, which made what was about to happen even more satisfying. She sat down across from my desk without waiting to be invited and immediately launched into a speech. "I hope you understand that Riverside Meadows has high standards," she began. "We expect Premier to provide responsive service and support our board's decisions without question. Robert Carlson understood this, and I expect the same from you." "Actually, Mrs. Henderson, we need to discuss some changes," I interrupted. She looked annoyed at being cut off. "What kind of changes?" "The kind where we start following Arizona HOA law," I said, pulling out a thick file. "I have reviewed your board's actions over the past 3 years, and I have identified multiple violations of state statutes. Selective enforcement, denial of due process, improper meeting procedures, and unauthorized fine schedules. Any one of these could expose the HOA to significant legal liability." Patricia's expression hardened. "I do not know what you think you found, but our board operates completely within our authority." "Your board operates however you want, and the previous management company was too worried about losing your business to push back," I replied. "That changes now. Premier Community Management will no longer support actions that violate state law, period." "Are you threatening me?" Patricia asked, her voice rising. "I am protecting my company and your homeowners," I said. "Starting immediately, all enforcement actions must be consistent and documented. All homeowners must receive proper notice and hearing opportunities. And all board decisions must follow proper voting procedures. These are not suggestions, they are legal requirements." Patricia stood abruptly. "This is unacceptable. I will take our business elsewhere." "You are welcome to try," I said calmly. "But you will need to call a homeowner vote to change management companies, which requires majority approval. I suspect most of your homeowners will be very interested to learn about the legal violations I just mentioned." She stared at me with pure hatred. "You did this because of your warehouse." "I did this because your board is out of control," I replied. "The warehouse situation just helped me see the scope of the problem. Speaking of which, Premier will be issuing a formal legal opinion that your interpretation of the warehouse covenant is incorrect and unenforceable. Any fines levied against my property will be contested. The board will override that opinion. The board can try, and then I will file suit for harassment and selective enforcement. I have documentation showing 3 similar structures that were approved without any mention of size restrictions. A court will rule in my favor, and the HOA will be liable for my legal fees. Is that really how you want to spend homeowner dues?" Patricia grabbed her portfolio and stormed toward the door. She paused with her hand on the handle and turned back. "You have not won anything," she said. "I have been running this HOA for 6 years. The homeowners trust me." "Then you should not have any problem in the next election," I replied. She left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. I sat back in my chair, feeling the adrenaline of confrontation. That had gone exactly as I hoped. Patricia was now aware that she had lost her compliant management company and gained an adversary who understood her tactics. The next step was to ensure the homeowners of Riverside Meadows understood what had been happening. I drafted a letter to be sent to every property owner in the community, explaining the management company change and outlining new procedures that would ensure legal compliance and fair treatment. I included specific information about homeowner rights under Arizona law, including the right to request hearings, appeal decisions, and access HOA records. The letter went out on a Friday, and by Monday morning, my phone was ringing constantly. Homeowners who had been living in fear of Patricia Henderson's arbitrary enforcement were suddenly realizing they had options. I took call after call from people sharing stories of harassment, unfair fines, and selective targeting. One caller was Tom Rodriguez, the man who had approached me after the hearing. "Jason, I do not know if you realize what you have just done," he said, "but you have given people hope. Patricia has been a tyrant for years, and nobody thought anything could change." "Things are about to change dramatically," I assured him. I also received a call from Gregory Walsh, the HOA vice president who had seemed uncomfortable during my hearing. He asked to meet privately, and I agreed to see him at a coffee shop near Riverside Meadows. Gregory arrived looking nervous, glancing around as if worried Patricia might appear. He was in his late 60s, with white hair and the perpetually worried expression of someone who regretted getting involved in HOA politics. "Thank you for meeting me," Gregory said after we had ordered coffee. "I need to tell you something, but I am afraid of the consequences." "Whatever you tell me stays between us," I said. "Patricia has been abusing her authority for years," Gregory began. "When I joined the board 4 years ago, I thought we would be maintaining the community and helping neighbors. Instead, Patricia has turned it into her personal fiefdom. She targets people she does not like with bogus violations. She manipulates meeting agendas to prevent opposition. She has even been steering HOA contracts to her friends in exchange for kickbacks." That last part got my attention. "What kind of kickbacks?" "The landscaping company we use is owned by her brother-in-law. She pushed through a contract that pays 30% above market rate, and she gets a cut. I found receipts in the HOA files that showed payments to a consulting LLC she owns." "That is embezzlement," I said. "Why have you not reported it?" "Because I am afraid of her," Gregory admitted. "She has connections with local politicians, and she threatened to destroy my reputation if I caused problems. But after seeing what you did, buying the management company just to stand up to her, I realized I have been a coward. This needs to stop." "Do you have documentation?" I asked. "I have copies of contracts, payment records, and her consulting LLC registration. I have been quietly collecting evidence for months, hoping someone would be brave enough to do something with it." "Give me everything," I said. "We are going to end this properly." Gregory handed over a flash drive containing dozens of documents. I spent that evening reviewing every file, and what I found was damning. Patricia Henderson had been systematically stealing from the HOA for at least 4 years, possibly longer. The landscaping kickbacks were just the beginning. She had also been billing the HOA for phantom consulting services, approving unnecessary repairs through contractors who gave her kickbacks, and even using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses that she disguised as community improvements. The total amount stolen was approximately $215,000. This was not petty theft, it was serious fraud that could result in criminal charges. I called David Chen and explained what I had discovered. He reviewed the documents and confirmed my assessment. "This is criminal embezzlement," David said. "You need to report this to the authorities immediately. If you sit on this information, you could potentially be seen as complicit." I contacted the Phoenix Police Department's white-collar crime unit the next morning. A detective named Sarah Ramirez took my call and scheduled a meeting for that afternoon. I brought all the documentation Gregory had provided, along with my own analysis of the financial irregularities. Detective Ramirez was a sharp woman in her 40s who clearly knew her way around financial investigations. She reviewed the documents carefully, asking pointed questions about how I had obtained them and what my relationship was to the HOA. "This is substantial," she said finally. "We will need to interview the board member who provided these documents and examine the original HOA financial records. I am going to open a formal investigation." "How long will that take?" I asked. "These cases can take months to build properly," Detective Ramirez replied. "We need to trace every payment, document every kickback, and build an ironclad case. But based on what you have shown me, I am confident we will have enough for charges." The police investigation became public knowledge within 2 weeks when Detective Ramirez and her team showed up at Patricia Henderson's house with a search warrant. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly Riverside Meadows HOA was infamous. Television crews camped outside the community entrance, interviewing homeowners about the alleged embezzlement. Patricia hired a lawyer and refused to speak publicly, but the evidence was overwhelming. The police seized her financial records, computers, and boxes of documents from her home office. They also interviewed Gregory Walsh, who provided a detailed statement about Patricia's activities. The HOA board held an emergency meeting to address the situation. I attended as the representative of Premier Community Management, along with half the homeowners in the community who wanted to see what would happen. The community center was packed beyond capacity, with people standing along the walls and spilling into the hallway. Gregory Walsh opened the meeting, looking more confident than I had ever seen him. "In light of the ongoing criminal investigation into Patricia Henderson's conduct as HOA president, the board has voted to suspend her from all duties pending resolution of the case. Additionally, we are calling for immediate elections to fill all board positions. It is time for new leadership." The room erupted in applause. Patricia was not present. Her attorney had probably advised her to stay away. The other board members who had enabled her looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Over the next month, Riverside Meadows transformed. New board members were elected, including Tom Rodriguez as president. The first action they took was to formally withdraw the violation notice against my warehouse, acknowledging that the size restriction had been misapplied. They also reviewed and reversed dozens of other questionable violations that Patricia had issued over the years. Premier Community Management became the model for how to support HOA boards properly. I implemented new policies requiring legal review of any enforcement action, regular training for board members on Arizona HOA law, and transparent financial reporting. Several other HOAs in our portfolio requested similar reforms after hearing about what happened at Riverside Meadows. The criminal case against Patricia Henderson moved through the system over the following months. The evidence was so clear that her attorney eventually negotiated a plea agreement. Patricia pled guilty to embezzlement and fraud charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. She was ordered to pay full restitution of $215,000 to the HOA and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. I attended the sentencing hearing, sitting in the back of the courtroom. Patricia looked diminished in her orange jail jumpsuit, nothing like the aggressive woman who had tried to bully me into demolishing my warehouse. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, Patricia stood and offered a brief apology that sounded rehearsed and insincere. The judge was not impressed. "Mrs. Henderson, you abused a position of trust to steal from your neighbors over a period of years. You used your authority to harass and intimidate people who questioned your actions. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment, it was systematic criminal behavior. The sentence reflects the seriousness of your crimes." Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a sense of closure. The woman who had threatened my business was now facing real consequences for her actions. Justice had been served in the most literal sense. My acquisition of Premier Community Management turned out to be one of the best business decisions I had ever made. The company was profitable from day one, and with improved management practices, client satisfaction increased dramatically. Several new HOAs approached us about taking over their management, drawn by our reputation for professional service and legal compliance. The logistics business continued to thrive as well. Without the threat of HOA violations hanging over me, I was able to focus on growth. We expanded into 2 new markets and increased our employee count to 63. The warehouse that had been the source of so much conflict was now operating at full capacity, supporting operations that generated over $10 million in annual revenue. Sarah and I celebrated our 15th wedding anniversary that year with a trip to Hawaii, something we had been too busy to do before. Sitting on a beach in Maui, watching the sunset, she turned to me with a smile. "So was it worth it?" she asked. "Buying an entire company just to fight the HOA?" "Absolutely," I replied. "We eliminated a threat, built a new business, and helped hundreds of people escape from petty tyrants. I would do it again in a heartbeat." "Let us hope you do not have to," she laughed. The story could have ended there, but there was one final development that made everything feel complete. About a year after Patricia's sentencing, I received a letter from Gregory Walsh. He had been serving on the new HOA board and wanted to thank me for everything I had done. "Jason," the letter read, "you probably do not realize the full impact of your actions. Riverside Meadows is a completely different community now. People are not afraid to express opinions or make improvements to their properties. The board focuses on actual community needs instead of personal vendettas. Property values have increased because potential buyers see a healthy HOA instead of a dysfunctional nightmare. You did not just solve your own problem, you saved an entire community. Thank you." I kept that letter in my desk drawer as a reminder of why taking bold action sometimes matters more than playing it safe. Patricia Henderson had thought she could use bureaucratic authority to crush someone who challenged her. Instead, she had picked a fight with someone who understood that real power comes from ownership and control, not from petty regulations. The Riverside Meadows HOA still exists, but it now operates the way such organizations are supposed to: maintaining property values, managing common areas, and serving homeowners instead of ruling over them. Tom Rodriguez proved to be an excellent president, focused on practical matters rather than power trips. The community flourished under the new leadership. As for my warehouse, it stands exactly as I built it, all 14,200 square feet of it. Not a single inch was demolished to satisfy a fictional violation. Every time I walk into that building, I remember the certified letter that started everything and smile at how dramatically things turned out. Premier Community Management grew to handle 53 HOAs across Arizona under my ownership. We developed a reputation as the company that would not tolerate board abuse or homeowner harassment. Several times, we actually dropped clients whose boards refused to operate within legal and ethical boundaries. That willingness to walk away from revenue gave us credibility and attracted better clients who wanted professional management. The business became successful enough that I eventually hired a full-time CEO to handle day-to-day operations, while I focused on strategy and growth. My logistics company remained my primary focus, but Premier provided diversification and passive income that strengthened my overall financial position. The debt I had taken on to finance the acquisition was paid off within 4 years, ahead of schedule. Rebecca Torres, the banker who had taken a chance on my audacious plan, called to congratulate me when the final payment cleared. "I have to admit, Jason, I had serious doubts about this deal," she said. "But you turned it into exactly what you promised, a profitable business acquisition that solved a personal problem. It is not often I see someone take that kind of risk and have it pay off." "The risk was calculated," I replied. I knew Premier was a solid business, and I knew Patricia Henderson was vulnerable because of her illegal activities. Sometimes the aggressive move is actually the safest option. Looking back on the entire experience, I realize how many things had to align for my plan to work. If Robert Carlson had not been ready to sell, if the financing had not been available, if Patricia had not been embezzling funds that created criminal liability, any one of those factors being different could have changed the outcome dramatically. But that is the nature of taking bold action. You identify an opportunity, assess the risks as honestly as possible, and commit fully to the path forward. Half measures do not work when you are fighting someone who has no intention of compromising. The story became something of a legend in Phoenix business circles. I was invited to speak at several entrepreneurship events about creative problem solving and turning threats into opportunities. Each time I told the story, people were amazed that someone would actually buy a management company to fight an HOA dispute. My answer was always the same. When conventional solutions will not work, you have to think unconventionally. Patricia Henderson had the backing of an entire organizational structure designed to support HOA enforcement. Fighting her through normal channels meant years of litigation with uncertain outcomes. Taking control of that organizational structure meant I could change the rules of the engagement entirely. It was the business equivalent of not just beating your opponent, but buying the game they were playing. The best part was knowing that my actions had ripple effects far beyond my personal situation. Homeowners across multiple communities now had better protection from board abuse. Property managers had the support they needed to do their jobs professionally. And other HOA boards saw what happened. When authority was abused, you could lose everything, including your freedom. My warehouse continues to operate successfully, supporting a logistics business that now employs over 80 people and generates $15 million in annual revenue. The building that Patricia Henderson wanted to partially demolish has become a symbol of what happens when you stand up to bullies and fight smart instead of just fighting hard. Sarah sometimes jokes that I have the most expensive HOA dispute resolution in history. She is not wrong. $8 million is a lot to spend to avoid tearing down part of a warehouse. But the return on investment has been extraordinary, both financially and personally. I occasionally drive past Patricia Henderson's former house in Riverside Meadows. A new family lives there now, apparently unaware of the drama that unfolded because of the previous owner. The house looks well maintained, the yard is neat, and there are no signs of the chaos that once radiated from that address. The community center where I faced down the HOA board is now used for normal meetings focused on actual community business. Children's events, holiday parties, neighborhood planning sessions, all the things an HOA should be facilitating, rather than enforcement hearings for fabricated violations. Tom Rodriguez sends me an annual update on how the community is doing. Property values have increased 23% since Patricia's removal, significantly outpacing comparable communities in the area. Resident satisfaction surveys show dramatic improvements. And the legal expenses the HOA faces have dropped by 90% because they stopped engaging in questionable enforcement actions. Premier Community Management has become the go-to company for HOAs that want professional, legally compliant management. Our client retention rate is 97%, and we have a waiting list of communities wanting to switch to our services. The 23 employees who were demoralized under the previous ownership have grown to 41, and employee satisfaction scores are consistently excellent. I never expected to be in the HOA management business. It was never part of my career plan or business strategy. But sometimes opportunities appear in unexpected forms, disguised as threats that force you to think creatively. The certified letter that started everything is framed on my office wall, a reminder that problems can become opportunities if you are willing to see them that way. Below it is a copy of the final letter Premier Community Management sent to the Riverside Meadows HOA board, officially withdrawing all violations against my property and apologizing for the previous management's support of illegal enforcement actions. Those two letters represent the beginning and end of a journey that transformed my business portfolio, helped hundreds of people, and sent a corrupt HOA president to prison. Not bad for what started as a simple property dispute. I still run my logistics company as the primary business, but Premier Community Management has become an important part of my professional identity. I am known in Arizona real estate circles as the guy who bought a management company to fight his HOA and ended up reforming an entire industry segment. It is a reputation I am proud of. The lessons from this experience have shaped how I approach other challenges. When faced with a problem, I now automatically ask whether there is a way to change the game entirely rather than just playing within existing rules. Sometimes the answer is no, and conventional solutions are appropriate. But sometimes, like with Patricia Henderson and the Riverside Meadows HOA, the answer is yes, and that is when things get interesting. My story has been covered in several business publications, and even a few legal journals discussing HOA reform. The consensus seems to be that what I did was unusual but effective, and it highlighted serious problems with how some HOAs operate. Several states have since strengthened laws governing HOA conduct, partly in response to high-profile cases like Patricia's embezzlement. I maintain a good relationship with the new Riverside Meadows board, attending occasional meetings and providing input on policy decisions. They have become a model for how community associations should function: transparent, fair, and focused on serving homeowners rather than controlling them. The warehouse that caused so much trouble remains my favorite building. Every time I walk through those doors, I am reminded that standing up for yourself sometimes requires creative thinking and bold action. Patricia Henderson thought she could bully me into submission using bureaucratic authority. Instead, She learned that authority is meaningless when someone is willing to acquire the source of that authority and use it properly. My employees at both companies know the story, and it has become part of our culture. We emphasize creative problem solving, standing up for what is right, and never backing down from bullies. Those values have attracted talented people who want to work for a company that actually lives its principles. Sarah has fully embraced our expanded business portfolio, even getting involved in some of Premier's community events. She has a natural ability to connect with people and has become an unofficial ambassador for better HOA practices. Several board members from different communities seek her advice on how to build positive community relationships. We recently celebrated our 17th anniversary, and I surprised Sarah with a gift, a small plaque that reads, "In memory of Patricia Henderson's tyranny, which brought us unexpected prosperity." She laughed and put it in her office, where it serves as a conversation starter with clients. The financial risk I took by leveraging everything to buy Premier Community Management was substantial, but it paid off beyond my expectations. The combined value of my businesses is now estimated at over $30 million. The logistics company is worth approximately $20 million, and Premier is valued at around $12 million after growth and improvements. I am often asked if I would do it all again, knowing what I know now. The answer is absolutely yes. Not just because of the financial success, but because of the impact it had on real people's lives. Homeowners who were being harassed by arbitrary enforcement actions now live without that fear. Property managers can do their jobs professionally without being abused by board members. And corrupt HOA officials know there are consequences for their actions. The legal system worked in this case, with Patricia Henderson receiving appropriate punishment for her crimes. But the legal system only got involved because I was willing to take the initial risk of acquiring Premier and uncovering the evidence of her embezzlement. Without that first bold step, she probably would have continued stealing from homeowners for years. I sometimes wonder what Patricia thinks about how everything turned out. She tried to force me to demolish part of my warehouse over a fictional violation. In response, I bought the company that managed her HOA, exposed her criminal activity, and sent her to prison. It is probably not how she expected that power play to end. The warehouse stands as a testament to the idea that you should not back down when you are in the right. It is also a reminder that creative solutions can be more effective than conventional ones. Most people facing an HOA dispute hire an attorney and prepare for years of litigation. I bought the management company and changed the game entirely. My business continues to grow and evolve. The logistics side recently expanded into Nevada and California, opening new opportunities for revenue growth. Premier Community Management has started offering consulting services to help HOAs improve their governance and avoid the problems that plagued Riverside Meadows. Both businesses benefit from the lessons learned during that intense period of conflict and transformation. I still live in the same house on the same property where all this started. The warehouse sits on my land, operating efficiently and supporting the business that has become so much larger than I originally imagined. Every morning when I drive past it on my way to the office, I feel a sense of satisfaction knowing that it remains exactly as I built it, a symbol of refusing to be bullied. The story of how I bought a management company to fight my HOA has taken on a life of its own. It has been shared countless times on social media, discussed in business schools as a case study in creative problem solving, and apparently inspired several other people to take bold action when faced with seemingly insurmountable obstacles. I receive emails regularly from people sharing their own HOA horror stories and asking for advice. I try to respond to as many as possible, offering guidance on how to document violations, challenge unfair enforcement, and work within the system to effect change. Not everyone can buy a management company, but everyone can stand up for themselves using the tools available. The satisfaction of seeing Riverside Meadows transform from a community living in fear to one that functions harmoniously is difficult to overstate. Property maintenance has improved because homeowners are no longer afraid to make upgrades that might draw Patricia's attention. Community events are well attended because people actually want to participate rather than avoiding anything HOA related. It is what community associations are supposed to be. My journey from frustrated homeowner to HOA management company owner taught me that sometimes the most direct path to solving a problem is not straightforward at all. It requires lateral thinking, bold action, and a willingness to commit fully to an unconventional solution. Patricia Henderson created a problem that conventional approaches could not solve quickly enough. So I created an unconventional solution that not only resolved my issue but fixed a broken system. The story continues to evolve as premier community management grows and the impacts ripple outward. But the core narrative remains the same. When faced with unjust authority, sometimes you need to acquire the source of that authority and use it properly. It worked for me, transformed multiple communities, and sent a message that abuse of HOA power will not be tolerated. My warehouse stands complete at 14,200 square feet, exactly as it was designed and built. Patricia Henderson is serving her prison sentence. Premier community management is thriving under ethical leadership. And I have learned that the most satisfying victories are the ones that not only solve your own problems, but make things better for everyone else too. That certified letter demanding I demolish part of my building arrived 3 years ago, and it changed my life in ways I never could have anticipated. It forced me to think creatively, act boldly, and ultimately build something bigger than just a resolution to a property dispute. The entire experience reinforced my belief that when someone tries to abuse authority, the right response is not to cower but to stand up and change the game completely. Word count: 9,000 words, approximately 10,000 tokens.